There's a particular kind of silence that falls over a room when someone pulls out an expensive watch, or casually mentions their new car, or drops the name of the exclusive place they just got back from. Most people lean in, they ask questions, they recalibrate their perception of the person. But there are others who don't. Their expression doesn't change. They nod politely maybe, but something behind their eyes stays completely still. And what's strange is that this absence of reaction, this refusal to be moved, can feel more unsettling than any visible envy or admiration, because it suggests that the entire language of status, the one most of us speak fluently without even realizing it, has no purchase on them. And that quiet immunity can make everyone else in the room feel oddly exposed. I'm Henry, and today we're going to talk about the psychology of people who are never impressed by money. Not people who claim they don't care about money while secretly obsessing over it, not people performing indifference for moral points, but those who genuinely experience no emotional charge when confronted with wealth, luxury, or the symbols of financial success. What's happening inside them? Where does this detachment come from? And what does it cost them? Let's start with something basic that most people don't think about. Money operates on two entirely different psychological levels, and most of the time we confuse them. There's money as a survival tool, the thing that keeps you housed and fed and medically stable, and then there's money as symbolic power, the thing that signals where you stand in the invisible hierarchy we're all supposedly climbing. For most people, these two functions blur together. They want money not just to be safe, but to feel significant, to be seen, to prove something to themselves or to the people who once doubted them. But for some people, these two layers don't merge. They understand money as a practical necessity, sometimes even an urgent one, but the symbolic dimension just doesn't activate. They see a luxury car and they think about depreciation, not status. They hear about someone's promotion and they calculate the stress-to-salary ratio, not the prestige. It's not that they're being cynical or contrarian, it's that the emotional circuit that's supposed to fire when confronted with displays of wealth simply doesn't complete. And this isn't learned. It's not a philosophy they adopted. It's more like a native language they were never taught. One explanation for this comes from habituation. If you grow up around money, not necessarily your own, but in environments where wealth is just part of the landscape, you develop a kind of emotional immunity to it. It becomes wallpaper. There's no novelty, no charge. You've seen the watches, the cars, the houses, the private schools. You know what they look like up close, how they smell, what they cost to maintain. And once you know that, once the mystery is gone, they stop functioning as symbols of anything. They're just objects. Expensive objects, sure, but objects nonetheless. The same thing happens in reverse. People who grew up with very little, who saw money destroy relationships or twist people into unrecognizable versions of themselves, sometimes develop a deep wariness of it. Not hatred necessarily, just a bone-deep understanding that money doesn't solve the things it promises to solve. And once you internalize that, once it's encoded in your nervous system through lived experience, no amount of luxury can override it. The equation just doesn't balance anymore. Then there is identity. Most people construct their sense of self by internalizing external feedback. They become who other people tell them they are, through praise, through validation, through comparison. And money becomes one of the most efficient tools for generating that feedback. It's measurable, it's visible, it answers the question, am I doing okay, with a number. But some people develop their identities differently. Maybe they had to because external validation was unreliable or absent. Or maybe they were raised in environments where achievement was decoupled from affection, so they learned early not to tie their worth to measurable outcomes. Or maybe something in their temperament just resisted that kind of outsourcing. Whatever the reason, they built a sense of self that doesn't require constant external calibration. And once you've done that, money loses most of its psychological leverage because it can't tell you who you are anymore. But here's where it gets complicated, because not being impressed by money isn't always a sign of inner security. Sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes it's a defense mechanism, a way of protecting yourself from wanting things you can't have, or a way of maintaining control in a world that feels chaotic by refusing to acknowledge the power money actually holds. There's a kind of person who dismisses wealth not because they've transcended it, but because they need to believe it doesn't matter, because if it did matter, they'd have to confront their own relationship to scarcity, or failure, or the ways they've been locked out of certain rooms, and that's too painful.
So they build an identity around not caring, and after a while they can't tell the difference between genuine indifference and a very sophisticated form of self-protection. If you're finding this uncomfortable, that's kind of the point. Before we go further, if this kind of psychological exploration is something you want more of, consider subscribing. I try to look at human behavior without the usual narratives we tell ourselves to feel better. No shortcuts, no easy answers, just the quiet, complicated truth of how we actually work. All right, let's keep going. There's also attachment theory. People with avoidant attachment styles often develop a pronounced emotional independence. They learned early that relying on others is risky, that vulnerability leads to disappointment, so they train themselves to need less. And that training extends to things, too. They don't let objects, even expensive ones, carry emotional weight, because that would be another form of dependency, another way of being let down. So they stay detached. They observe wealth from a distance the same way they observe most things, with interest maybe, but no real investment. And from the outside, this can look like confidence or superiority, but it's often just a very old strategy for staying safe. Then there's the social consequences, because not being impressed by money makes you strange in ways that are hard to articulate. People don't trust it. They assume you're lying or performing, or that you secretly want what they want but won't admit it. It disrupts the social script. Most relationships, especially casual ones, rely on shared values and shared aspirations. And in cultures like the ones in the US, UK, or Canada, money is one of the most common shared aspirations we have. It's a conversation shorthand, a way of signaling that you're participating in the same game everyone else is playing. But if you're not playing, or if you're playing by different rules, people don't know what to do with you. They can't place you, and that makes them uncomfortable. There's also a loneliness to it. Not a dramatic, painful loneliness, just a quiet sense of separation, because so much of social life revolves around displays of status and the rituals of acquisition. People bond over shopping, over upgrades, over the shared fantasy of what they'll buy when they finally make it. And if you don't share that fantasy, you're just watching from the outside. You can participate politely, but you're not really there. And over time, that distance accumulates. You start to feel like you're living in a parallel version of the same world, where everyone else is speaking a language you understand but don't feel. And here's the uncomfortable part nobody talks about. Sometimes not being impressed by money is just another form of ego, a quieter one, maybe, but still a way of feeling superior, a way of telling yourself that you see through the illusion, that you're operating on a higher frequency than everyone else. And that can be true to some extent, but it can also be a trap. Because the moment you start defining yourself by what you're not impressed by, you're still letting that thing define you. You're still organizing your identity around money, just in reverse. And that's not freedom. That's just a different kind of cage. So what are we left with? People who aren't impressed by money aren't better or worse than anyone else. They're just wired differently, or shaped differently, or protecting themselves differently. And that difference comes with trade-offs. There's a certain kind of peace in not needing external validation, in not being moved by the things that move everyone else. But there's also isolation in it, and sometimes, if you're honest, a quiet sense of loss. Because even if you know that money doesn't deliver what it promises, there's still something human about wanting to believe it might, about wanting to feel that surge of hope or excitement when something new and shiny appears. And when you can't feel that anymore, when the circuit just doesn't complete, you're left with a strange kind of clarity. But clarity isn't the same as comfort. And maybe that's the real cost. Not that you're missing out on luxury or status, but that you're missing out on the shared delusion, the collective belief that keeps most people moving forward, even when it doesn't quite make sense. And without that belief, you're left with something quieter, something truer, maybe, but also something harder to carry.